Welcome to the Thrive Chapter Spotlight. Today we're in Genesis chapter 42. I wanted to give you a little bit of history of what's been happening from chapters 37 through 41. We were introduced to Joseph and his family. First of all, Joseph was one of 12 brothers. If you remember, his mother was Rachel and his brother was Benjamin. They were beloved of their father Jacob. Because he was the favorite child, his brothers hated him so much that one day when he came out into the field, they threw him into a dry cistern and left him there. Whenever the Midianite slavers come by, they sold him into slavery. And we know that he ended up in Potiphar's house. And in that household, he flourished. God blessed him, and as a result, Potiphar's house flourished as well. Unfortunately, Potiphar's wife had other ideas. He was accused of sexual harassment and he was thrown into jail. While he was in jail, he met two interesting people that were officials in the Pharaoh's household. One was his butler or his cupbearer, and one was his baker. These were very important men because if you think about it, they prepared drink and food for Pharaoh. And if they could not be trusted, Pharaoh could die. So they were very important. They had two dreams. Joseph was able to interpret those dreams. And it was interesting because everything happened exactly like he said. On the third day, the butler was lifted up back to his position. Unfortunately, the baker, he died. We'll just leave it at that. But unfortunately, the butler forgot about Joseph, and he languished 2 more years in prison. But one night, an interesting thing happened. Pharaoh had 2 dreams. And if you remember, the dreams were about fat cows and fat ears of corn and skinny, scrawny cows and thin, withered ears of corn, and how the skinny ones ate up the fat ones. And he was disturbed because no one could tell him what it meant, and it troubled him deeply. Then all of a sudden, the butler remembers Joseph, and he recommends Joseph, brings him out of prison. And one minute he's in prison, and the next minute he's standing in front of Pharaoh, interpreting his dream. But what was interesting, God had been preparing Joseph this whole time, and he gave credit to God from the first moment. He gave credit to God for the interpretation. So what he told Pharaoh was that there would be 7 years of immense prosperity, but then there would be 7 years of famine, that everybody would forget about the prosperity that had happened. Because of his wisdom, Pharaoh lifted up Joseph to the second in command. He was greater than everyone in the kingdom except Pharaoh. At this time, Joseph was 30 years old. Whenever he was sold into slavery, he was 17. So 13 years he had been either a slave or in prison. So think about how God used that long stretch of time when it would have been easy to despair. But God used Joseph, and that should encourage you and me, because he can use us to, even in the bad times when we feel, what in the world is this good for? He will use it for good. Joseph implemented a successful plan. He was an administrator. He had implemented a successful plan to save the country of Egypt. They saved so much grain during the plenteous years that they stopped keeping record. There was so much grain. But unfortunately, that all came to an end, and the famine hit. It hit not only Egypt, but it hit Canaan as well. And in Canaan, that's where Joseph's family was. Remember Joseph's father, his name was Jacob. God had changed his name to Israel. They were there, and they were starving. So in chapter 42, Jacob looks around, and it's kind of funny. In the first verses, he says, "What are you standing here around for? Go get us some corn." So that's exactly what happened. He sent his 10 sons to the land of Egypt to buy corn. And what's ironic above everything else is that who did they stand in front of? Who did they bow down to? Just like Joseph's dream, they bowed down to him. And he remembered that dream. He knew them, but they did not recognize him. And that was very interesting. The one person that did not go was Benjamin. Remember, Benjamin was Joseph's full-blooded brother. He was the baby, and Israel loved him, and he kept him at home. Joseph remembered the dream, but he also wanted to see if his brothers had changed. Remember the last time that he had saw them, he was looking up from a cistern, crying to them for mercy, and they would not listen to him. That's the last memory he had. So he was wondering, are they the same men? Are they treating Benjamin the same way? So he had some questions, and he spoke harshly to them. He did not speak in Hebrew. He spoke through an interpreter. He was speaking Egyptian. They did not recognize him, and he accused them of being spies. He was very harsh, and he threw them in prison for 3 days. Now, Joseph could have revealed himself at any moment, but he chose not to. He wanted to test them to see how they would react whenever he gave them some requirements. The brothers were terrified, to say the least. And an interesting thing happened. Joseph told the men, in order for me to believe that you're an honest man, I want you to bring back your brother. I want you to prove who you are who you say you are. The men were terrified, and they started speaking among themselves in Hebrew, and he overheard them. And it said that while he overheard them, they revealed the guilt they felt over what he'd done to them. So in Genesis 42:21, I want to read these verses. This is what the men are saying to each other, and Joseph's overhearing them. And they said one to another, "We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Spake not I unto you, saying, do not sin against the child, and you would not hear it? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required." And from that moment, Joseph excused himself, and he wept. He realized that his brothers were different. They had changed. They felt guilt over what they had done to him. They went back home without Simeon. Joseph required one man to stay behind. The rest would go home and take the corn and the wheat to the family, and they were to bring Benjamin back. That's the only way Simeon would be released. That was Joseph's test to see what the brothers would do. Somehow, I want you to think about, has someone hurt you like Joseph's brothers did him? Have you begged for mercy from someone and they just overlooked you and did not care about what happened to you? If that's the case, think about how God used the situation that happened with Joseph. He could have been bitter. He could have turned around. He could have killed his brothers instantly and no one would have said a thing. But God was preparing him not just to be reconciled with his brothers, but to save their whole family. God had a plan. His plan was for Joseph to preserve the whole line, Israel's line. So today I want to encourage you to think about the things, think about people that have hurt you, and then forgive them. Let it go. Just forgive them and see what God can do with it, how he can change it from a bad situation to a good situation according to his will. Thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of this. I know I have, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks.